So the main way in which they do it differently is how it does the transaction handling. So the transaction handling in Aurora DSQL is done via, effectively, they create like a micro VM. And by micro, I mean, maybe a hundredth of a CPU. We're talking absolutely minuscule, like almost like Lambda, how Lambda just takes exactly what it needs. So effectively, you get an isolated VM for every transaction, which means that can scale. So typically, you end up with any relational database. As you have connections coming in, they take a small amount of compute, memory, resource from your database layer, and over time that just builds and builds, and eventually you just get totally blocked out. A write will lock the reads on like the certain rows, so you can't access them, and you end up having it basically you can't scale infinitely. You will always end up with a limitation. So what this does by having an isolated VM is you effectively have a small database engine that runs in a VM for each transaction. So none of them even ever know about any of the other transactions going on. There is effectively no locks in the database. So every read goes to the storage. Effectively, it basically gets a timestamp when you start that read. It creates a VM. It goes to the storage and it pulls all of the data that you need consistent with your timestamp. So under the hood, you're running Postgres. So Postgres has effectively the MVCC system, which means that it has different versions of the data at different times. As it gets changed, you effectively, you don't delete that data. It just kind of gets hidden and the pointer to it gets removed, which allows you to do rollback and so on and so forth. So effectively, you go and get the version of your data that you need for your transaction pulled into your own VM, where you can work with it however you want. So you're no longer touching the database at that point. You're completely isolated, running in your own personal database. You can then do whatever you want to that data. You can make changes. You can, basically you can then start to modify. You can do updates. You can start to do writes. And it's not until you hit the commit button does that then entire transaction get pushed down in one go. So that's like the big difference. So neither Cockroach nor Cloud Spanner work quite in the same way. They have a similar way of managing the transactions, but they don't create these entirely individual VMs, which then I think in theory gives Aurora DSQL so much more scope to grow. There's no one layer that could ever bottleneck. Everything can just grow independently of each one.